Today is day 30, and today the war produced two developments that could matter more than any missile count from the last 4 weeks. The first, Iran agreed to allow 20 ships under the Pakistani flag to transit the Strait of Hormuz, 2 ships per day, in coordination with Iranian naval authorities. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Ishaq Dar announced it on X and called it a welcome and constructive gesture and a harbinger of peace. A Pakistan Navy ship escorted the first Pakistani merchant vessel through the waterway on Sunday. The second, Iranian politicians are actively pushing for Iran's exit from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Let me start with the Hormuz deal, because what it is and what it is not are equally important. What it is, the first confirmed, structured arrangement under which specific vessels are transiting the strait with Iranian authorization since the war began on February 28. Before the war, approximately 130 ships transited the strait daily. Since the war, that number dropped to fewer than 6, all in individual coordination with Iranian authorities who had been charging undisclosed fees for passage. The Pakistani deal is different. It is formalized, announced publicly, attributed to Pakistan's diplomatic mediation, and covers a named category of vessels, Pakistani-flagged, for a defined quantity. 2 ships daily, 20 total in this initial arrangement. What it is not, a reopening of the strait. The Strait of Hormuz remains functionally closed to normal commercial traffic. No American-flagged vessel, no Israeli-associated cargo, no tanker from a country Iran considers hostile can transit freely. The global energy disruption, the one the IEA called the worst in history, has not ended. The approximately 130 ships that transited daily before the war are not moving again. This is Iran allowing 2 Pakistani ships per day in a conflict that has a global baseline of demand for dozens of tankers passing per hour. But the diplomatic significance is real and should not be underestimated. Pakistan is the designated mediator between the U.S. and Iran. It delivered the American 15-point ceasefire framework to Tehran last week. It is hosting today's Islamabad summit of 4 foreign ministers. And now Iran has specifically chosen Pakistan as the first country for whom it formalizes a Hormuz transit arrangement. That sequencing is not accidental. Iran is signaling through this concession that it recognizes Pakistan's mediation role and is willing to provide a tangible benefit to its primary diplomatic interlocutor. It is not giving the U.S. what it wants. It is giving Pakistan what it needs to continue justifying its role. That is calibrated diplomacy, not a reversal of Iran's strategic position. The Islamabad summit on Sunday brought together the foreign ministers of Pakistan, Turkey, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. No American official attended. No Israeli representative was present. No Iranian official was in the room. What this summit represents is the formation of an independent regional diplomatic bloc. 4 Sunni-majority states, 2 of them historically aligned with the United States in Gulf security arrangements. All of them now acting as a collective broker attempting to construct a ceasefire framework that both Washington and Tehran might accept. Egypt's Badr Abdelhadi said the meetings were aimed at opening direct dialogue between the U.S. and Iran, which have communicated only through intermediaries during the entire war. Turkey's Hakan Fidan, who has maintained active lines to both sides, arrived in Islamabad on Saturday evening. Saudi Arabia's Prince Faisal bin Farhan, whose country has been on the receiving end of Iranian missile and drone attacks targeting its oil infrastructure, its air base, and its cities, is participating in talks aimed at ending the war that is simultaneously hitting Saudi Arabia and being funded by American military operations conducted partly from Saudi territory. That is an extraordinary position for Riyadh to be in, and its participation in Islamabad signals that the kingdom is actively seeking an exit from a conflict it did not choose to join. Now to the NPT, because this is the development that deserves far more attention than it is receiving. Al Jazeera's correspondent reporting from Tehran on Sunday cited Iranian politicians publicly pushing for Iran's exit from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. This comes in response to what Iran describes as sustained U.S. and Israeli attacks on its civilian nuclear infrastructure. including universities, research centers, and the Bushehr nuclear power plant, which has been struck 3 times in the past week. Iran has accused the U.S. and Israel of playing with fire by targeting nuclear sites. Foreign Minister Araghchi has threatened a heavy price for what he calls Israeli crimes against nuclear infrastructure. The NPT is the foundational international treaty governing nuclear weapons. Its Article X explicitly allows signatories to withdraw with 90 days' notice if extraordinary events have jeopardized their supreme national interests. The last country to invoke Article X was North Korea, which announced its withdrawal in January 2003 and subsequently developed and tested nuclear weapons. If Iran were to follow the same path, the geopolitical consequences would be historic. Here is why this matters beyond the obvious. Iran's NPT membership has been one of the few remaining structural constraints on its nuclear program, giving the IAEA a legal basis for inspection rights and giving international diplomacy a formal framework within which to negotiate. An Iranian NPT withdrawal would eliminate those inspection rights. It would signal that Iran no longer considers itself bound by international nuclear law, and it would dramatically accelerate the timeline and arguably the international legitimacy of any Iranian decision to move toward weapons-grade capability. The IAEA, which has repeatedly urged military restraint around nuclear sites during this war, has noted that there is no evidence Iran had a structured nuclear weapons program when the war began. But it has also noted that Iran has blocked IAEA inspectors from visiting sites damaged in the 2025 12-day war. A formal NPT withdrawal would transform an already difficult inspection situation into a complete cessation of international oversight. At the moment, this war was justified partly on the basis of preventing Iranian nuclear proliferation, striking Iranian nuclear infrastructure, and providing political cover for Iranian NPT withdrawal would represent a profound strategic irony. The war designed to stop Iran's nuclear program, potentially accelerating the legal and political conditions under which Iran builds one. Iran's parliament speaker, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, addressed the Iranian people on the war's 30th day with a message that sets the tone for where Iran's leadership believes this conflict is heading. He said, and I quote from ILNA's reporting, "The enemy openly sends messages of negotiation and dialogue and secretly plans a ground attack." He added that Iranian forces are waiting for the arrival of American soldiers on the ground to set fire to them and punish their regional partners forever. That language is not bluster for the sake of domestic morale alone. It reflects an assessment that the U.S. troop movements, the 82nd Airborne deployments, the USS Tripoli carrying 3,500 Marines now in the CENTCOM area, the Pentagon weighing up to 10,000 additional ground forces, represent preparation for a ground operation. The Pentagon has described this week as preparing for a possible week-long ground operation in Iran, according to the Jerusalem Post. House Majority Leader Steve Scalise, appearing on ABC News This Week on Sunday, was asked directly whether there would be Republican support for ground troops in Iran. His response, "We're not at that point yet." He did not say no. He said, "Not yet." That is a significant choice of words from the House Majority Leader of a party that has given this president virtually unlimited war authorization deference for 30 days. The ground troop question is the central strategic uncertainty of this war. Rubio said this week the U.S. can achieve its objectives without any ground troops. But the objectives Rubio describes, destruction of Iran's missile production capacity, elimination of nuclear program, behavioral change from Tehran, have not been achieved in 30 days of the most intensive air campaign in modern history. The gap between the stated objectives and the achieved results, at day 30, is where the ground troop question lives. Now, Reza Pahlavi at CPAC. Because it is a window into the fracture inside the American political coalition over what this war is actually for. Pahlavi, the exiled son of Iran's last Shah, addressed the Conservative Political Action Conference in Grapevine, Texas, on Saturday. He received a standing ovation from an audience that included hundreds of Iranian monarchists who had traveled to CPAC specifically to hear him. He told the crowd, "President Trump is making America great again. I intend to make Iran great again." He proposed extending the Abraham Accords into what he called the Cyrus Accords, creating a normalized relationship between a post-Islamic Republic Iran and Israel. He called for the United States to stay the course and not accept any settlement that leaves elements of the current regime in place. And he said, "You cannot reform a snake. Venom is in its DNA." Trump, when asked about Pahlavi earlier this month, said he was a very nice person, but suggested that someone from within Iran would be more appropriate to lead a transition. That is a telling gap between Pahlavi's vision and Trump's own stated preference, and it exposes the central ambiguity in the war's political architecture. Is this a war to eliminate Iran's nuclear program and change its behavior, or is it a war for regime change? These are different objectives with different endpoints, different resource requirements, and different diplomatic consequences. Pahlavi's answer is unambiguous. Regime change, complete, no negotiation with current officials. Tucker Carlson's answer, also from within the American right, is the opposite. This was supposed to be America first, not a new Middle Eastern war. Rubio's answer is destroy the missile and nuclear capability, end it in weeks without ground troops. Trump's answer changes by the day. This ambiguity is strategically costly. It makes it impossible for Iran to understand what compliance with American demands would actually look like. It makes it impossible for mediators in Islamabad to construct a framework that satisfies American objectives because those objectives are not settled. And it creates space for the hardest-line voices inside Iran and among American hawks like Pahlavi's supporters at CPAC to push toward maximalist outcomes that make negotiated settlement structurally impossible. On the ground on Sunday, the IDF launched what it described as widespread strikes in Tehran, hitting a residential area in Sa'adatabad in northern Tehran, wounding 3, and a western Tehran neighborhood, wounding 9. A family of 4 was killed in Bushehr province in an attack that also hit a water facility in Khuzestan. Iran struck multiple sites in Israel overnight, including fuel storage at Ben Gurion Airport and an electronic warfare center in Haifa operated by Israeli defense company ELTA. An American-born Israeli soldier was killed in combat in southern Lebanon. The WHO reported 9 paramedics killed and 7 wounded in 5 separate attacks in southern Lebanon on Saturday, one of the deadliest single-day tolls for health workers in the conflict. 4 hospitals and more than 50 primary healthcare centers in Lebanon have been forced to close. In Iraq, Syria reported intercepting a drone from Iraq targeting a U.S. military base, with pro-Iranian Iraqi groups claiming responsibility. An attack attributed to U.S. or Israeli forces targeted the residence of Kurdish region President Nechirvan Barzani, drawing condemnation from Syria, the UAE, and Iraq. The Iraq War, which the U.S. has been working to keep separate from the Iran conflict through a newly announced High Joint Coordination Committee, is becoming increasingly difficult to contain. This is day 30. The Islamabad summit is meeting. Pakistan brokered 20 ships through the strait. Iran is discussing NPT withdrawal. The Pentagon is preparing ground operation options. Congressional Republicans are refusing to say no when asked about boots in Iran, and Reza Pahlavi is on stage in Texas promising to make Iran great again. None of those things points to a war that is ending. All of them point to a war that is expanding, in geography, in institutional consequence, and in the fundamental question of what it is actually trying to achieve. The next 10 days, until Trump's April 6th deadline, will determine whether the Islamabad track produces something the war's diplomatic logic can work with. If it does not, the pressure to escalate into ground operations from the Pentagon, from Israeli military planners who say they need several more weeks, from American hawks at CPAC, will be harder for Trump to resist than it has been at any point in the last 30 days. The war is at a turning point, but every day for the last 30 days has looked like a turning point too. Let me close with a detail that arrived today and that connects everything else. Iran agreed to facilitate humanitarian aid and agricultural shipments through the Strait of Hormuz following a UN request. Pakistani vessels are now being escorted through by the Iranian Navy. These two things, small as they are relative to the scale of the crisis, represent the first operational softening of Iran's Hormuz posture in 30 days. They are not a ceasefire, they are not a reopening, but they are Iran demonstrating through carefully calibrated actions that it can use the strait as a diplomatic instrument, closing it to pressure, opening it selectively to reward. This is precisely the leverage the Islamabad Quartet is trying to build upon. If Pakistan can demonstrate that its mediation produces tangible results, ships moving, aid flowing, a formal Hormuz arrangement expanding from 20 Pakistani vessels to include Turkish, Egyptian, and Saudi cargo, then the diplomatic track has something concrete to show. It becomes a proof of concept that Iran responds to structured engagement, that the strait can be reopened incrementally without a military operation, and that the mediating states have genuine influence over Tehran's behavior. That is the theory of the Islamabad summit. Whether it holds depends entirely on whether the United States is willing to offer Iran something in return, some softening of the 15-point demand list, some security guarantee against resumption of strikes, some pathway to sanctions relief, that Iran's leadership can accept without losing face domestically after 30 days of telling its population that resistance is the only answer. That trade has not happened yet. But today, for the first time since February 28th, something moved through the strait by arrangement rather than by force. 30 days, one deal, 2 ships per day, and a war that shows no sign of ending. I will see you in the next one.